Thank you, Mr Chairman. I'm very pleased to take a call here in Part 6 of the Taxation, GST and Remedial Matters Bill. We are considering amendments to stamp and cheque duties. And the first thing I'd like to do is commend the Minister and the Chair for the fact that this particular clause and part has no relationship to the onerous 70-page supplementary order paper made available only in the last 50 hours now, in fact, to us as parliamentarians. And what this part relates to at least has been through the appropriate process in terms of consideration by the Finance and Expenditure Committee of all of the issues relating to the changes the government was seeking with Part 6. And these, of course, relate to Stamp and Cheque Duties Act 1971, a period not familiar to some members of the House. And, of course, what this references to is an exemption under a double tax agreement. And the history of that is, as some members of the House will know, there have been recently concluded tax treaties with Australia and also with the United States, which include a new exemption from source country tax for interest derived by banks. And so together with Clause 79 in this bill, these clauses 102 and 3 are clarifying the circumstances where someone is eligible to pay an approved issuer levy. And what the AILs do is make clear that a borrower can pay the levy in order to qualify for the exemptions under the double tax agreement, even if paying the levy makes no difference to the way the transaction is dealt with under domestic law. So this is actually addressing some uncertainty that exists around the treatment of interest paid to foreign banks operating through a branch here in New Zealand. We say that's an appropriate move. I would like to ask the Minister and the Chair just to take a call and just relate to us about the difference in stamp duty regimes as they apply here and in other parts of the world. Most particularly I'm interested to know about Australia, where I do understand that stamp duty still applies on property, and it's at quite a high level, up to about 2%, I believe, in some Australian states. And it would be interesting to know if the government's ever given any consideration to that issue in terms of any of the tax changes it's bringing through in the course of this Parliament. Just looking at the issue of the approved issuer levy, it's a domestic law mechanism that can provide relief from the non-resident withholding tax on interest paid. It's the non-resident withholding tax on interest paid to an unrelated foreign lender can be reduced to nil if the borrower agrees to pay a 2% levy, and borrowers agree to do this where the lender would simply demand more interest to cover the non-resident withholding tax. So we've got those new-ish treaties in place now, tax treaties with Australia and the United States. That's a good thing. That makes it easier for businesses to operate across the Tasman and across the Pacific through to the United States. Goodness knows we need businesses being better able to operate in what has been the most difficult business environment in living memory. So we want to see that tax treaty with Australia and that tax treaty with the United States actually operating at the best possible level to ensure that businesses are able to operate efficiently, effectively, without any extra costs attached. So what this is doing is including an exemption from source country tax for interest derived by banks, and for interest derived from New Zealand, the availability of the exemption depends on the borrower paying the approved issuer levy, unless the borrower is not eligible to pay the levy, or if there is no such levy, or the rate exceeds 2% of gross payments. So what these proposed amendments are attempting to do is clarifying the circumstances in which someone is able to pay the approved issuer levy. They make it clear, and the Select Committee considered these issues in some detail. That's how the process should be, because when we're dealing with issues as complex as this, we do need to have focus on the matters in front of the Select Committee rather than being passed by supplementary order paper. These are complex matters. They can relate to quite large sums of money, for which New Zealand has a very keen interest, and obviously we want to make sure that when we are introducing technical amendments of this type, we do so in the most appropriate fashion, and that is done here in Part 6 of this bill. We were seeing these amendments brought through in clauses 101, 102 and 103, introducing these amendments in relation to stamp and Check Duties Act of 1971. That's the appropriate process for legislation.
Dr. Paul Hutchison.
Mr. Chairman.